Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. My name is Ken Shorgen, and as always, I'm here with Paul. And Paul, we've got a very fascinating thing geopolitically that's taking place. The US and Russia may be becoming partners in helping to mediate what's going on with Iran, especially, but overall in the Middle East. Paul, as always, I want to thank you for being part of this discussion. And what are some of the big topics and points that you're getting from this out of nowhere mediation talk?
Yeah, well, welcome, obviously, as well, Ken. Pleasure when we catch up. Well, this is a long-standing problem, and frankly, the United States caused this, and it relates to the whole issue of what is Iran doing with its nuclear program. Iran is insistent it's purely for civilian purposes, but the West at times has suspected it has military applications. And then they put all these sanctions against Tehran in the process. Obviously, Israel's constantly panic stricken that Iran's making nuclear weapons. And if you go back to 2015, the UN Security Council, along with Germany, approved the JCPOA, which was a joint comprehensive plan of action that was regarding Iran's nuclear program. And in return for agreeing to restrictions, there was an intention to lift sanctions on Tehran. However, Trump got elected, and for some inexplicable reason, well, maybe it is explicable, decided to just cancel the agreement, which was a really foolish decision to make. But anyway, what's done's done. So that's the kind of background to this. Now, interestingly, we've talked about this previously, and I've mentioned it on my own podcasts and on X. There was suggestions that Trump was very keen to get Iran back into the JCPOA. I doubt it's going to be the original JCPOA, but something similar. And of course, there was a lot of reticence to do this in Iran itself. The Iranian president, Pezeshkian, said he's willing to negotiate with the US, but the Ayatollah said that Tehran regards Washington's previous actions as being duplicitous, which of course he's correct. It doesn't mean that there isn't any chance of this happening. But obviously, one thing that's very clear to the United States is that, and we know this, Iran and Russia are allies. They've signed this comprehensive agreement, which covers everything. And the belief from the United States' perspective is, well, you've developed this very mutually beneficial, respectfully cooperative relationship. It is comprehensive. And therefore, seeing as you're an ally, Moscow could potentially be a mediator for a peace settlement with respect to Iran's nuclear program, which is also, well, a concern for the United States. I think their concerns more because it's a concern for Israel. And the argument now, therefore, is, well, Russia, as part of our rapprochement, maybe, you could assist us in getting Iran to the table. There's even suggestion that Putin himself would be happy to mediate Iran-US nuclear talks. And we did comment on this previously. The Iran nuclear program was briefly discussed between the Russians and the Americans when they met in Riyadh during those first high-level talks. Not a huge amount of detail, but there's confirmation on both sides it was discussed, and the anticipation is going forward, well, we will continue to have these discussions. So that's the kind of background to this. Now, this is monumentally important because if the Russians can do this, if the Iranians are willing to cooperate, and if a bona fide agreement can be reached that would have to be ratified by the UN Security Council, would have to be enforced and not allow the United States to say, well, we've signed this and then we're not really removing sanctions against the Iranians. The other point is there's been noises coming out from the Trump camp that they want to slash Iran's 3 million barrels of oil per day that it exports to 300,000. Well, that's not in the spirit of wanting to enter into some sort of agreement. We best call it JCPOA 2.0. But if it does, it's a monumental shift because it would, I think, go a long way to stabilizing the region. It would mean that the risk, and we saw issues where there was this tit for tat between Israel and Iran with respect to missile strikes, etc. And then it's gone quiet, fortunately. And the hope is it will stay that way. And this will go a long way to alleviating the concerns Israel have had. Whether people agree or disagree is irrelevant. What's relevant is if they have a concern, then they may act on that concern. And the last thing West Asia needs is these two nations at a fully fledged war. So it looks in principle as though the US has intelligently said, we have to avoid this. And they're trying to placate Israel's concerns, rather like the way the Americans walked in. I think it was Witkoff went and said to Netanyahu, we're having a ceasefire, that's it. And it happened. Whether it holds, it still is, remains to be seen. But it seems as though the US is taking a more firm line with regards to this. So the argument could be, if we get a nuclear deal in place, Iran is not allowed to remotely look like it's going to develop nuclear weapons. What's your problem? And it goes a long way to creating stability in the region, which frankly, everyone should applaud. And this is one of these things when you actually have an adult relationship, as the Americans and Russians hopefully do, then one side or the other can do a lot to help mediate with regards to Iran in this case, who was clearly a very strong ally of Russia.
There's two things that stand out because you got to take a look at going back to the way President Trump dealt with Iran during his first term. And that was when there was an in-between conflicts going on in Ukraine, going back to the Maidan coup and then eventually the start of the SMO. But Iran, the way that Trump dealt with it, he had a really, at least on the surface, burgeoning economy. Not a problem with energy at the time because fracking was still, near high production. But now the U.S. is in much greater economic straits, and so with that being said, Trump really can't afford to involve the military or involve foreign policy into fomenting more and more and more conflicts. If he truly believes, as he's saying, that he wants Ukraine done because of all the deaths going on, well, you'd be a hypocrite if you didn't say the same thing about, the conflicts in the Middle East, whether it's Palestine, whether it's Egypt, whether it's, wherever, Lebanon. So with that being said, I think that Trump realizes that he's in a much lesser position of power to dictate things in the Middle East. And secondly, I truly believe that he has taken the time to recognize the blowback that has occurred due to choosing, the killing of Soleimani versus choosing a diplomatic approach to what's going on with Iran. And you said that another thing that was important. When Trump was during his first term, there wasn't this agreement between Russia and Iran. Now there is. And the thing that stands out to me is in just the first 2 months or month and a half since Trump has become inaugurated and has taken the authority, this is the second big thing with Russia that he's implemented or engaged in. And there's going to be another one expected in May for, was it Victory Day? So I think you're seeing this shift, and perhaps it was pie in the sky, perhaps not, where Trump was making these outlandish statements about, we need a G3, China, Russia, and the United States, overseeing a lot of the different geopolitical things, the economic things. and he's leaving Europe out of it. And I think that's one of the most important things, because if he's uh, pivoting away from Europe and focusing on the two other big players in the world, China and Russia, then he can't really create enemies on all three fronts. You've got to create allies, and one of the biggest ways to create alliances is to take the one that, you know, there would be much benefit on both sides. And in that way, over time, perhaps Putin and Lavrov could get Trump to be amenable to working with Xi rather than seeing him as an adversary.
Yeah, it's a bit of a complicated one because the US is clearly, a sad went. The US doesn't want anything to do with Syria. And we're not here to discuss Syria, but I'm trying to highlight an example where the US got out of Afghanistan. They're just that whole region. I mean, okay, Afghanistan's not strictly part of West Asia, but the point is they're looking to get out of places and really not to have to deal with problems in West Asia, obviously because of the fact that Israel and the United States are such, strong, close allies. Then, of course, if Israel's got a problem, the US has a problem. But it's also worth noting, and you made an important point there, Ken, with regards to amongst others, with regards to the relationship between Russia and Iran. It's always been fairly strong, but it's significantly strengthened in terms of trade and energy since the start of the Ukraine war, but it always was strong. But it's just gone on to another added dimension. And this, sort of comprehensive agreement they've signed has been in the works for quite a long time, but it's telling they've got it over the line. And there is no doubt Iran was supplying drone technology to Russia, irrefutably. It's also worth noting that Trump spoke when he spoke to Putin on the phone in February, talked about how Russia could help with Iran and this kind of deal, getting it back on the table with regards to containing their nuclear program. But of course, Trump made all these comments about maximum pressure orders when he just got elected, and the US wouldn't tolerate Iran building nuclear weapons. Well, I don't doubt he's making these statements as much as anything to placate the Israelis, get them so they're not getting itchy trigger fingers again because of their ongoing fear that something's going to happen. Now, obviously, tellingly as well, the Iranian foreign ministry came out and said, when they were asked if Russia had offered to mediate between Tehran and Washington, and they had quite an interesting, pleasing response when they said, well, look, it's natural for countries to offer their assistance. They didn't flatly refuse it because they don't want to create an affront or an embarrassment to Russia. There's also Lavrov confirmed about the US meeting with his Iranian counterpart when they met in Tehran. So everyone's been very open. No doubt part of the discussion would have been, look, the Americans are interested in resurrecting the deal. I know it went sour last time. I know you're furious about it. I know you don't trust them because, they're not trying to strong arm you into a negotiated settlement. I know you don't trust them, and the Soleimani thing's a very important point you made as well, Ken. That was a disastrous decision on every single level. You just don't go around assassinating people of that stature in any country, whoever it is, because it's just politically just not something you would do. It creates a very bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. And Trump has had to swallow an awful lot of the backlash from that happened privately, going, look, you just overstepped the mark. But anyway, we're not here to focus solely on Soleimani, but what is telling as well is the US and Iran are clearly trying to find channels of communication to start dialogue and finding a way to go, okay, we screwed up in the past, we made big mistakes, but we need to do something about it. And there's no doubt the IAEA, the nuclear watchdog, said, look, it'd be great if you could start talks. I mean, because there's no doubt Tehran has been more and more enriching what you might call near nuclear warhead fissile material. It's certainly increased the stockpile of it quite significantly since Trump's election, but that's part of, just trying to puff your chest out a bit and make a point to Trump that you mean business. So there's a lot of brinkmanship and politics in this, but potentially, this could be a hugely important development. And if you've got, I'll obviously let you speak now, Ken, because I've spoken quite a long time, and then I'll come back, I think, with a final point that I think is worth mentioning.
Perfect. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize this, but Iran didn't initially start a nuclear program until they could not get assurances from the administration before Trump to expand their refineries and start being able to refine their oil on their natural soil. And so they needed new power sources. They needed to expand, and they were being hindered in this. So the nuclear program, and especially they started it with Russian aid, was all about providing more energy, more power to the country, because they couldn't do it using conventional fossil fuels, et cetera. And then, of course, they even allowed the International Atomic Commission to come in and monitor it and view it. But unfortunately, there were policymakers in the U.S. and the West who didn't want even the threat of a nuclear program, whether it was for military use or not. And, we go back in Stuxnet and that whole rigmarole. But the reality is that if Trump was to offer something along the lines of what they need, even if it's, hey, let's get China involved. You've got this big desert area. Let's take some of their technology with solar and provide for you the need that this whole thing started behind. Then, these are the types of things in the negotiations that are vastly would push the narrative, as well as pushing the relationship forward a whole hell of a lot, rather than to nitpick at some of the BS, like, oh, you're going to use it for nuclear weapons. Oh, you're going to use it for this. Well, how about dealing with our initial problem? Because I think Iran is taking a look at Saudi Arabia, at Dubai, at the UAE, and seeing how they're modernizing and building these great cities and infrastructures, and they want to get part of it too. And can you imagine an Iran that is moving into the 21st century? They're not going to be worried about conflicts. They're going to be worried about commerce.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And just a final point, and this is something the US and the Israelis are very cognizant of, and that is the military cooperation between Russia and Iran. So, for example, Russian missile specialists have visited Iran several times in recent years. This is part of this defense cooperation. And they visited Iranian missile production facilities, including underground facilities. They took place in the autumn of last year. And so it's not exactly clear where they visited, but both sides confirmed it. And this relates to air defense missile systems, artillery, rockets, and advanced weapons development, missile testing. And this is all part of this Russia-Iran comprehensive agreement, which includes a significant 20-year military component. There's no doubt Iran has helped Russia to some extent with drone technology. Because, everyone knows those Shahad drones were deployed in Ukraine. But this is also focusing minds in Washington and Tel Aviv to go, well, hang on a minute. They're obviously working together. They're obviously developing technologies. It's better if we have rapprochement with Russia, in the case of the US, because Russia and Israel never not had rapprochement. They don't have necessarily the easiest relationship, but they have a relationship. But to get Russia involved to mediate, and then it's better to have everyone on the same side, because there is a fear that Iranian military technology is a two-way street, so Russia could be sharing technology with them. So it's a way of just trying to keep some sort of lid on those developments and saying, well, if we can normalize relations, then perhaps we can also persuade Russia not to share the same amount of technology. Maybe part of the deal with the Iranians would be the same, but in return, we're going to be far more lenient on removing sanctions and removing them quickly, whatever the deal ends up being. So it's all just inevitably has to be win-win cooperation. And that obviously is what all sides should be looking to do. So this is a major development. It's a huge development in relation to West Asia. And that's why I think it was worth discussing it today, because these are the kind of things that often get overlooked or not even discussed or seem to be irrelevant, when in fact they're hugely relevant given the very tempestuous relationship between the Israelis and the Iranians, but also, in a far broader context of trying to get stability in West Asia, which frankly everybody should want to see happen. And this could be a huge step forward. And if Putin himself gets directly involved, then I think that would go a long way to resolving these difficulties, but also it would make the Americans go, well, rather than having Russia as an adversary, maybe in the future we can all work together and Russia can help us deal with some of the people or nations we perceive to be a problem, even though from Russia's perspective they're not a problem. But if Russia can do things to help us, well, it's not just about direct win-win cooperation. It also works indirectly. So there's nothing to lose. And that, we're early days, this might go nowhere, but if it does, it's a sign that the United States is maturing very quickly into, dare I say it, potentially a great nation amongst equals in the future, who's learning that real diplomacy can go a long way to resolving problems rather than threatening nations with regime change and wars and sanctions, etc., etc.
Adults in the room. What a novel concept. Paul, as always, thank you for your great insight and for being a part of the discussion.
Yes, and likewise.
And to everybody here at the Sirius Report community, thank you for all of your support. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, send this out to anybody you think it might be important to. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.